Welcome to Selling Secrets. I'm your host, Josh Gay. Join me as each episode I interview experts in their field about spy films, action movies, literary heroes, video games, and much more. Do you know what it takes to make a successful Hollywood blockbuster, a best-selling novel, or an interactive gaming experience enjoyed by millions? Let's find out together on Selling Secrets. Joining me today, I have an incredibly special guest. It's author of the upcoming James Bond 00 universe novel, Double or Nothing, Kim Sherwood. Kim, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Really lovely to be here.
I'm very, very excited. And as I said to you offline before we started recording, incredibly humbled to have you on and to have an author of your caliber on this show. It's incredibly exciting. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Now, obviously, I know who you are. I've been following your journey since the book was announced. But for those who may not know who you are, can you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm a novelist and I'm a university lecturer in creative writing at the University of Edinburgh. My first novel, Testament, came out in 2018, which is about the sort of the legacy of the Holocaust across 3 generations of a family. So it begins in 1944 and it continues to the present day. That came out in 2018, and I was very fortunate. It did very well and won some prizes. And then in 2019, I was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, which was really exciting. And around that same time, I was invited by the Fleming estate to write this trilogy of 00 novels. And so I've now written the first one. I'm halfway through writing the second. And my second, we're going to get confused with numbers because on the one hand, I'm writing my 4th novel, and on the other hand, the second one's about to appear. But my next sort of novel that's me, rather than me writing Bond, is called A Wild and True Relation, and that's another historical novel, and that's out in 2023 with Virago.
Very exciting. Well, you're very prolific by the sound of things. I'm struggling. I'm writing my own little passion project thing, and I'm struggling to get it done within several years, let alone the speed you're putting them out at. So
yeah, well, it's a new
hats off.
Well, thank you. It's a new learning process for me because Testament took me 7 years to write, and by the time A Wild and True Relation comes out next year, that will have been 14 years since I began it. Obviously not writing it every day. I wrote Testament in between, but 14 years since its birth. But now for the 00 novels, I'm writing roughly a book a year. So I've been trying to kind of take a leaf from Ian Fleming, who used to go to Jamaica and for 3 months a year, and whatever he wrote in those 3 months was the book. I don't have a villa in Jamaica, but I'm trying to learn the art of pith to change my writing process. Can't spend years mulling it over now.
Well, I have a villa in the Yarra Valley if you ever need somewhere to immerse yourself in otherworldly adventures.
Thank you. I may take you up on that.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're here to obviously talk about the 00 novel, which I've had the privilege to begin reading a proof copy of, and I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this book. It's so exciting. Can you give us a quick synopsis of what the book's about and what it follows on?
Absolutely. So it's set in the present day, and James Bond is missing, presumed captured perhaps by a terrorist organization, but nobody really knows. And there are a new sort of cast of heroes, other 00 agents, who are trying to find him and also trying to stop a global threat. So there's a sort of 2 threads to the novel. In one of the threads, tech billionaire Sir Bertram Paradise has said that he has a sort of a solution to the climate crisis, and seems like a very saintly figure. And 004 Joseph Dryden is trying to work out how true that is, or if there might be something more sinister going on underneath. And in the other sort of strand of the novel, 009 Sid Bashir and 003 Johanna Harwood are both after this terrorist organization that perhaps has Bond captured, and the two threads intersect as the novel develops.
It's very exciting. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, as I said. Before we get into a bit more of the, I guess, the writing process, what's the reaction been like from the Bond community since the announcement of the book? Everything I've seen online has been incredibly positive, but can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, it's been amazing. I've felt so welcomed and so kind of included, because it's an incredible fan community, Bond. I think it's a really positive one. People just encourage each other's passions. There's no sort of hierarchy. There's no sense of a wrong or a right answer to anything. Everybody has their favorite Bond, their favorite film, the things that they maybe don't like so much. And there's always a space for that. And everybody has a different angle onto it, a different kind of interest, and there's space for that. So, I was nervous when it was announced, because I'd known this was happening, or I'd had an idea that this maybe was happening for a while, but I'd had to keep it secret. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. So for me, when they said, okay, now we're going to do the public announcement, I felt really nervous. Not least because I hadn't really spoken about it with anyone. So it was like this thing that was kind of my little secret, my private fantasy, was suddenly going to be very public. And I wasn't sure, would anybody really even take notice? And so we had the announcement day, and it went up online on The Guardian, and then was picked up by other news outlets. And I tweeted about it, and then I sort of sent the tweet out, and then I thought, I wonder if anyone will even really care or notice. And I went and made myself a cup of tea, came back, looked at my computer, and I had 500 notifications on Twitter, and I thought, I guess people noticed. And suddenly I had news stories in languages I didn't recognize. It was, and then my face was in the papers, and it was very surreal. So I was so relieved when the fan community was so positive and so welcoming, so kind of excited, because it really felt like, as a lifelong fan myself, I keep thinking, it's two things. If the Flemings are happy, I'm happy, and if the real fans are happy, I'm happy, because I feel like that's my community too. So that's how I hope will really love the book.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, as you said, it's a very positive community. I don't think I've had much in the way of any sort of negativity. And if there ever is, everyone's very sort of supportive against that. It's not like, I don't like to talk negatively about other ones, but say Star Wars, for instance, which can be very polarizing, especially when there are, diverse voices or anything like that coming into the community. So I think the reception to the book and to yourself has been nothing short of astounding and positive beyond belief. Now, can you tell me your history with James Bond a little bit? Is there a bit of a connection with your family? I've been following you on socials for a little while now, and I see some photos. What's the connection there?
Yeah, so my grandfather was an actor, George Baker, and he was in a few Bonds. So he played Sir Hilary Bray in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and did quite a lot of the sort of dubbing for Lazenby for that film, when Lazenby's pretending to be Hilary Bray. And then he was in The Spy Who Loved Me as well. So that, for me, when I realized that, it was so exciting, because for him, he'd been an actor since he ran away from school when he was 14, and he joined a repertory theatre. So he'd been in everything. So, he was delighted to have been in Bond, but it was just one part of his very long acting career. And he played Inspector Wexford, Ruth Rendell's Wexford, which had been so huge. And so that for him was sort of his defining role. And I became a Bond fan, when I first saw Pierce Brosnan's films on TV. So what would I have been, maybe 8 or so. And I was always playing spy stories as a kid. I would spy on the neighbors, and I'd write little notes about them in invisible ink, which luckily they were very tolerant of. And I was always writing spy stories and carrying a magnifying glass around. So then when I saw James Bond, and here was this, hero who was so suave and so cool and so brave. You know, that sort of dive off the dam in Goldeneye, the heroics of that, the spectacle of that. I always really loved as well. I remember seeing it on TV. In The World Is Not Enough, when he rolls down the Millennium Dome, which was a big deal at the time because it was being built and it was the Millennium, and it was, you know, we were taken there as school kids. So that scene where he's hurt and he's rolling down it, and then he hits the floor, and then he gets up and he rolls his shoulders and keeps on going. I loved that. I thought, you know, that's somebody who will fall off a hot air balloon down the Millennium Dome, hit the floor, and stand back up again. So I was entranced by that character. And then when I was about 12, probably, I said to my mum, "Oh, I'd like to try writing a spy story, but I don't know how." And she said, "Well, you should read some." So we were in Camden Town in London, and we were near Black Girls Books, which is a fantastic secondhand bookshop. She said, "Let's go buy you some." So we bought From Russia with Love. And it was the Pan paperback edition, that quite pulpy cover, which I love. And I just was absolutely entranced by Fleming's style. And I think sometimes his style isn't talked about enough. He was a very visual writer, vivid colors, incredible writer on place, very evocative, very suspenseful, these terse sentences. And then Bond himself, and From Russia with Love, of course, is the 5th novel. So this is quite a self-reflective Bond. You know, he's been on a few adventures now, and he's beginning to question whether there's that moment where he wonders if his younger self would recognize him. How he's sort of he talks about it as the tarnish of treachery and ruthlessness and fear, and the toll that's taken on him. And that's kind of baked into the plot of that book, because the Russians are out to kind of destroy the morale of the British Secret Service, and they decide to do that by targeting the myth of Britain, what they call the myth of Scotland Yard, of Sherlock Holmes, of the Secret Service. And they ask, they say myths are built on heroic deeds and heroic people. Have they no such men? And the answer is, there is a man called Bond. So it's Fleming kind of looking at the myth he's created and interrogating everything that represents. So it's also very much a novel of ideas. And I was just completely entranced by the plotting, the writing, the concepts, the character. And I fell in love, really. And then I had there's that big James Bond book, the big gold one that came out around the time of that day.
The DK visual one. Yep, another one.
So I had that, and I remember I was staying at my granddad's house, and I was flicking through it. I'd just been bought it probably for Christmas or something. And there was my granddad. There was a picture of him standing next to Roger Moore. So I ran downstairs with this book to the kitchen and said to him, "You never told me you were in James Bond." And he just sort of laughed and said, "Oh yes, darling, you know, but that was a long time ago." And God, I just quizzed him on everything. And you know, he was very nice about it. I think he was happy I was so excited. So you know, that to me was always very special, and it's very special. He died quite a while ago now, but I count myself very lucky. I was very close with him, and I feel very lucky that I can watch his films and have his voice back, and have his gestures back and his eyes back. And you know, a lot of people don't have that, so I'm very fortunate in that regard.
Must be very surreal to have that experience. As you said, not many people have that privilege to be able to connect with their loved ones who've passed on. So that must be an incredibly emotional experience for you to go back and watch those, right?
Yeah, it is. I remember actually watching The Spy Who Loved Me just after he died, and I kind of thought I'd find it comforting, but that first time, I just found myself in tears. And then I was sort of laughing at myself, like, "Oh, who cries at The Spy Who Loved Me?" You know? I mean, I love The Spy Who Loved Me. It's my favorite Roger Moore, but you know, it's not one that's supposed to be a tearjerker.
No, it's definitely not like the last Daniel Craig one, that's for sure. Well, talking Bond, and obviously you've had this rich background and family connection. What was the inspiration for you to write a James Bond universe book, and what was the inspiration for Double or Nothing?
So the Fleming estate, he's still, you know, it's the Fleming family, he still run the book. They were looking for a new writer because Anthony Horowitz's sort of tenure has come to an end. And it's very important to them that their writers be real, true Bond fans. You've got to really care because this is their family legacy. So they were after a new writer and they were trying to find somebody who was, a massive fan and always had been. And my agent heard this, and being a fantastic agent, she remembered that the first time she and I had ever had lunch together, I had said to her, "Oh, one day I want to write a James Bond novel," which I said half jokingly. I've been saying this to people all of my life. You don't actually expect it to happen, but it's a lesson in saying mad things out loud because maybe they will happen. So she heard that they were on the hunt, and she remembered that I had tweeted a picture when my first novel came out, Testament. I tweeted a photo of it in a bookshop next to Anthony Horowitz's book. And I tweeted something like, "Oh, one step closer to my dream of writing Bond." So she scrolled through my Twitter, found that, screenshot it, sent it to the Fleming estate and said, maybe this is the writer for you. So they then read Testament, they really liked it, and they invited me to send them some ideas. And they said, "Do you have anything that sort of proves you're a fan, because that's so important to them? Because anybody can say, 'Oh, I love Bond,' but, do you have something that sort of shows it?" And very luckily, my mum had kept hold of a school report I'd written when I was probably about 13. We had some homework. The homework was to write about an author you admire. And I had written about Ian Fleming. And I'd made this whole booklet with photos and everything that I chopped out of magazines. And my mum still had that. So I sent a scan of that to the Fleming family. And I said, this is quite literally a lifelong dream. And they then said that what they were after was a kind of expansion of the James Bond universe. They wanted to bring in some other 00 characters who could be heroes as well. And they wanted it to be set in the modern day. So those were the two sort of criteria, in a sense, that I was given. And then it was about, imagining it from there. And in a sense, since I was a little kid with my magnifying glass flying on my neighbours, I've been waiting to do this. So it was just a matter of, I reread all of the Fleming books, rewatched all of the films, and just looked for those little threads that Fleming had set running and not tied up. What can I follow? What ideas can I pick up on? What aspects of his style resonate with mine that I can pick up on? And how can I keep the James Bond that we love and bring in a wider universe around him?
That's I can definitely see that. Speaking of the Bond that you read, what existing Bond did you draw on for inspiration? Did that mainly come from the literary world, or was that more from the films? And likewise, did you look outside of Bond for inspiration? Like when I'm reading the book, I get echoes of the old BBC. I think it was a BBC series, Spooks.
Yeah,
Like I get echoes of that.
Yeah.
Was it what inspired you in terms of content with the book?
So it was very much rereading all of the Fleming novels as a starting point, and as I say, looking at the world he'd created, trying to modernize it, and trying to remain true and faithful to the stories he was telling, and wonder, well, how would he do it today? Bringing in that kind of old and new in a sort of relationship together. And also looking at, I've always loved spy literature. So going back to John le Carre, going back to Graham Greene, Fleming's sort of generation, and before and after. What I had was the opportunity to make it an ensemble cast. So if you're going to bring in multiple heroes, if it's not just going to be Bond, you can have more than one 00 in the story. So in that sense, it is quite reminiscent of Spooks, which was a fantastic ensemble cast. And actually, a lot of my favorite TV shows are ensemble casts. Dialogue is one of my favorite things to watch, hear, read, and dialogue is one of my favorite things to write because it's about relationships. And that's what you get from an ensemble cast. You can have characters, 00s, who mean a great deal to each other, and who are entangled with one another, and with Bond himself. So that for me was something that was an opportunity in these books that maybe hasn't been in the others, where Bond is sort of, in a sense, the only hero of the novel.
Hmm. Well, that exploration of the relationships between the double O's and between Bond is one of my favorite things in the book. I think that's something very rich that hasn't been done before, as you said, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that aspect of it. Um, in terms of your research for the novel, outside of Bond and all those sort of things, what was, I guess, involved with that? Did you have any, ex-spies or military resources or anyone who you could draw on?
Yes, I did. So one of the characters, 004, Joseph Dryden, he was in special forces. He was in the army before becoming a double O, and he sustains an injury in the field, which means that he can't be on the front lines anymore. And that's kind of what brings him to the notice of MI6. And this is a really common path for special forces operators who have all of that experience but can't be an active soldier anymore. They often become agents for MI6. So I wanted to sort of follow that path with Dryden. And it's important to me with my writing to do the research and to bring in that kind of authenticity if I can, and plausibility. And that was a real thing for Fleming as well. You know, his plots are fantastical, but they are grounded because
Mm,
he has that journalistic eye for detail that makes them feel real. And he'll often refer to in the books, he'll often refer to other cases, other crimes in the world or other spy cases that have been in the news and that readers would know about. So M will say, oh, it's just like last year in Bangkok when this thing happened, and now we're worried it's going. So then you, as the reader, you sort of buy in.
mm,
Um, so for me, the research is really crucial, and so I wanted to learn more about, what would happen to a special forces operator who sustains this kind of injury in the field. What would they go through next, and what are the repercussions for them physically and for their mental health? So I was told that I spoke to a few doctors who said, what you really need to do is talk to the Royal Defence Medical Centre,
mm,
who deal with soldiers returning. So this is a sort of, it's a military medical outfit, and they're quite opaque, they're not public facing. So I after lots of Googling, I found a phone number that I thought maybe would connect me to someone. So connected me to somebody who said they were, Corporal so and so. And I said, oh, hello, I'm an author. I'm writing James Bond and I have some research questions. And I just wonder if maybe there's a doctor who could talk to me. And there was a bit of a silence. And then they said, you're writing James Bond. I said, yes, yes, I am. I know that it sounds ludicrous. And I said, oh, my name's Kim Sherwood. I said, mm-hmm. And I said, you can Google me. It's been in the news. So there was a bit of a silence while they Googled. And then they came back to me and said, somebody might call you. I thought, okay, probably no one will. And then I got this call from somebody very high up, a military doctor, very high ranking. Said, oh, hello. I was told that you're writing James Bond. I said, yes, I am. And would you mind talking to me? And they were so kind. They talked to me for over an hour about what would have been the medical response to this injury, what the effects
mm,
would have been afterwards, and how that would go on to kind of affect that operator in the field. And they were just so sort of generous with their knowledge. And that's what I found. I found it with Testament too. There's always an expert in the thing that you're writing about, and they're, in my experience, always so generous with their time. They want to talk to you. They're keen for somebody to be interested and curious about their subject. So I sort of did a version of that, with all of the different kind of subjects in the novel. The sort of threat, I suppose, in the novel that the double O's are facing is the climate crisis. And that involved, talking to activists, talking to scientists, just trying to get as much information as I can. And then you filter it through, what do the characters need? What do the characters care about? What does the story need? And that sort of begins to shape your plot.
absolutely. Well, speaking of Testament, your previous book as well, obviously that is quite different, I would say, to the modern spy thriller. It's
Mm,
much more of an introspective personal drama.
mm,
I thoroughly enjoyed. I listened to the audiobook.
mm,
I thoroughly enjoyed that, but it
mm.
is very, very different to James Bond.
Yes.
Um, what was the process like as an author who's, maybe had a bit more of a background in, I'm not going to say traditional literature, but not necessarily thriller writing, What was the process for you taking on what I would class as more of an action-oriented, plot-driven thriller compared to something like Testament?
Mm. I began to think about it in terms of what do the characters want. So, in perhaps a more literary novel, I mean, I'm using literary with sort of air quotes around it because it's a fairly nebulous term that's
Mm.
assigned to books, often just for marketing purposes. But um, Testament was kind of a literary novel in quotes, and I began to think, what do characters want in a literary novel compared to what they want in a thriller? And I think often in literary fiction, what they want is abstract. You can't touch it. It's something like belonging or identity, family, a sense of self, a sense of home. And those are abstract things. Whereas I think often in a thriller, what the characters want is concrete. You can touch it. They want to get the file back that's been stolen that has the essential information on it, or they want to stop the bomb going off. It's a very concrete thing that they're driving towards. For me as a writer, what I'm interested in is relationships and characters and how that can drive story. So my challenge then was to bring the concrete and the abstract together. What are the characters after concretely? What are they trying to stop the villain doing? What's the
Mhm.
threat of the book? What's going to go boom at the end? And how does that map onto the internal journeys of those characters?
Mm.
And what being a spy kind of wrought upon their lives. So for me, it was bringing together those concrete and abstract questions almost.
Oh, that's very, yeah. That resonates with me quite a bit because that's the approach I take when I'm writing my stuff as well. Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. Sorry, I'm not getting lost for words. It's just firing off all those synapses in the brain.
Yep.
Um, Now, you mentioned that you're a lecturer in creative writing. What impact has that had on you as a novelist?
Well, it's in a way it goes back to relationship because when you're writing, you're alone. And there's a part of me that really likes that. I've just finished up a 10-day writing residency at Agatha Christie's house in Devon here in the UK, which is a
Wow.
beautiful Georgian manor house in Parkland. And they let writers go and stay in what was the servants' quarters. And you're just completely alone. There's no phone signal. There's no Wi-Fi. I don't drive, ironically, for someone writing Bond. So I couldn't leave the estate. So it's just 10 days by yourself. And I was writing the second book in the trilogy. And I love that period of being alone with the work and alone with the characters. Teaching gives you the opposite. Teaching puts you in relationship with people. It puts you in a room with people. It's conversation, it's connection, and it's a privilege because oftentimes you'll teach somebody through their entire degree. So you'll know students for 3 or 4 years, and you'll see them from their first sort of seeds of inspiration to what they flourish to by the end. And I find that just a real joy and a real privilege to be part of somebody's creative process.
Hmm.
And it also kind of it keeps your hand in a little bit because it's easy to preach and not practice. So I'll be doing sort of exercises with my students, and I'll remember, halfway through, oh yeah, actually this was something that I used to do for my writing because I found it helpful. So maybe I should keep doing it, because it's easy to think, oh, I'm under a deadline and I've got to just write. But then actually sometimes pausing and kind of engaging in those exercises, those formative exercises, can be really helpful.
Hmm.
So I have one that's I ask students to get characters to write a letter to them as the author about how the character feels about having been invented. And it's a good way to kind of get through any creative blockage that you're having because the
Yeah.
character might be really mad at you and then you find out why. So that kind of thing, I'll say to students, do this and then for 15 minutes, then come back to me. And then I think, oh, maybe I should do it too. Then I join in, and I always find that really refreshing.
I love that. That reminds me of the plot of, it was a Will Ferrell movie where he's the character in the
Yeah,
book, and
yeah,
then he becomes self-aware that he's in a book.
yeah, yeah.
Well, what was it like? Obviously, you're approached by the Fleming estate. What was it like becoming a writer in this incredibly rich historical legacy of James Bond. Like, what was that like? You're coming up alongside the likes of Raymond Benson, John Gardner, Anthony Horowitz, Jeffrey Deaver. There's probably others who I'm forgetting. Ian Fleming. Um, there must be some sort of pressure that comes along with that. What was that like for you when you found out, right, I'm writing and I'm joining this? What was that
Mm.
like for you?
It was exceptionally surreal. In a way, I had a bit of a favor with Double or Nothing because I was writing a lot of it while it was still a secret that I was doing it, so
Mhm.
nobody knew. So I could sort of pretend, it was just my little fantasy. But when I write it, I listen to the Bond themes on repeat. So it's great fun for my partner. He's been listening to Diamonds Are Forever for years now. But I have them on repeat because it's the mood I want, and I just giggle to myself. I just laugh to myself that I'm writing James Bond, that I'm writing Moneypenny Said or Bond Said, and it's real, Um, so that was quite lucky because it was just contained and nobody
Mm.
knew. And then when it became public, and then there was suddenly the realization that, oh, people are going to read this, then it was quite daunting. So I vacillate between excitement and fear, and certainly, joining that list. So many incredible writers have been part of this world, both in literature and film. And Anthony Horowitz, his Alex Rider novels were some of my favorite books as a kid. So for me, kind of following on in his footsteps, his book's out now.
Mm.
Following on from your childhood hero is, yes, a little daunting, but very exciting.
Absolutely. And yeah, I can only imagine what that would have been like. Um, so obviously you've spoken that Fleming publications wanted it to focus more on the world of Bond.
Mm.
Um, can we talk to the characters themselves a little bit more? What was the inspiration for the characters of Johanna, Sid, and Joseph in the book?
Well, I thought about it as if James Bond was a star. I thought about Bond having his own gravity because this is a cultural icon. There are very few characters like Bond who have entered public consciousness in this way. Maybe Sherlock Holmes, some Shakespearean characters, maybe Harry Potter, that have kind of lived beyond their pages. So Bond has a gravity to him, and I
Mm.
thought if he was a star and he had gravity and he was in the center of a universe, where do the other characters sit in relationship to that star? How close are they to his gravity, or how far away are they from his gravity? So I started off with Johanna Harwood. I thought I'll have a double O who he's had a relationship with. So they've been romantically involved together. And for Harwood, I wanted to kind of explore the the concept behind a license to kill. What does that mean to have a license to kill? And I thought, well, what's the opposite of it? And the opposite of it is the Hippocratic Oath, the promise to heal anybody. So I thought, what if she had trained originally as a surgeon? And originally her sort of intention in life was to save people. And then something happens in her life that changes the course of it. And she becomes a double O and she takes a new oath and she has a license to kill. So she in some ways represents the conflict at the heart of being a double O, which is something Fleming really explores a lot, particularly as the books go on, say from Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Bond becomes very introspective,
Mm.
and the weight of killing becomes very heavy on his shoulders. So I wanted to kind of draw on that, with Harwood, and to have this character who is very, I would say, one of her main skills is adaptability and persuasion. That she can meet any occasion, she can adapt herself to whatever the circumstances are. And I was
Yeah.
curious, what would the cost of that be on a person if you are never quite yourself because you're being what the situation or the person across the table from you needs you to be?
Mm.
So that was sort of some of the inspiration behind her character. And then I thought, let's get a love triangle going. Everybody loves a love triangle. So 009, Sid Bashir, James Bond was his mentor. And with Sid, I was thinking about, um, the sort of the notion of Bond as a blunt instrument, which is something that came through a lot more in the Daniel Craig films. It's not really there so much in the Fleming books, because just by the nature of point of view and prose, you're much more part of Bond's thought process. I think that Daniel Craig's Bond as well is, we do see him having that more investigative role at points, and he's always, a step ahead of people. He's always working things out before MI6 does, but he's constantly called a blunt instrument, and I was curious about that, and that sense of being used, being a tool, being an instrument. So I thought, what kind of tool is he? And he's quite, in some ways, self-deprecating about that in the Fleming books. In From Russia with Love, he thinks of himself as being pimped for England. So he thinks of himself as this tool that's being used. And I thought, if he's a blunt one, let's have Sid Bashir be a fine one. Incredibly intelligent, strategic. His is a life of the mind. He believes that he can adopt a utilitarian philosophy, the good of the many over the good of the few, and that he can kind of, in some ways, depart from the sort of motto of his family in a way. To save one life is to save all of humanity. He thinks that he can set that behind him and have a much bigger picture and be devoted to a more clinical way of living and thinking. And he becomes a 00 while Harwood and Bond are having a relationship, which eventually ends, as all of Bond's relationships do. And Sid and Johanna Harwood get together and become engaged. So there's a sort of tension between them. So those are two characters who, going back to that metaphor of the star, are very close to Bond's gravity, and care about him deeply and want to find out what's happened to him and want to get him back. And then there's 004, Joseph Dryden, who's sort of a bit further away from Bond's star. He has his own thing going. To him, Bond was just a sort of surly, arrogant, somewhat attractive man who was in the office every now and again, and now he's missing. Really, the problem of that then is, do we have a security leak? That's what for him is the question. Is everything working good? And he is sort of on his own arc, reunited with an old lover who's become the henchman of the villain. So he has his own sort of journey to go on. And as I said, hopefully then those two threads sort of intersect and tangle up with each other as the book goes on.
They're incredibly deep and exciting characters. I like the approach you took with Sid, where he's not overthinking things, but sometimes his thinking mind does get in the way of maybe being as effective as he could be. I really like that about his character. The name Joanna Harwood, though, it carries a lot of gravity, and it may not necessarily be synonymous with, I guess, general cinema goers, but she was one of the screenwriters for Dr. No, and arguably one of the most influential figures in the creation of the cinematic James Bond outside of Ian Fleming. Why was it important for you to pay homage to her with a character named after her?
Well, as you said, she was there kind of at the very beginning of this character's transition into screen, co-writing Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And From Russia with Love is actually my favorite Bond film. So that, for me, I wanted to kind of honor her role in that early inception, especially as a woman writer. I felt like, for me, coming aboard this world that has had more male writers in it than female, it was important to kind of tip my hat, to the first woman who was there at the very beginning and who was really crucial in that writing process. So I wanted to be able to honor her. So I wrote her a letter and just asked, would it be okay if I did this? And she was really gracious, and we've kept writing to each other, which has been, really lovely, because it's, amazing for me to be able to talk to her as a writer, as this person who carries history with her. So I hope it's a kind of tribute to her, really.
Absolutely, definitely a very poignant tribute. Speaking of being the first female writer in literary Bond, obviously we've had female writers come in with the likes of Harwood or Phoebe Waller-Bridge in the film world, but there hasn't been a female author in the literary Bond universe before. What does that mean to you coming in as a writer?
Well, there was, I said I'm not entirely alone because there was Samantha Weinberg's Moneypenny Diaries series as well.
True. I forgot about that. Yeah.
There is a kind of lineage, but yes, certainly not as deep a lineage as the male writers in the franchise. And for me, it was just an opportunity to kind of show my love for it.
Hmm.
As I said, dreaming of this my whole life, and kind of when I was younger and I'd play spies, I'd play Bond. So to actually get to do that, to write it down. But also with the opportunity of an ensemble cast, what you can do there is come up with other heroes that people can identify with. So maybe when they're, fantasizing and imagining themselves into this world, there's a character like them who they could feel attached to. So it was also that kind of opportunity to, I suppose, open some doors.
Absolutely. And what sort of legacy as a writer in this world do you want to leave with the Bond universe and the Fleming world as a whole?
Oh goodness. Well, I suppose I can't really speak in a way to legacy because I just hope people read them and enjoy them. I hope that it resonates with the fans, with people who really love Fleming's books, with people who really love the films, people who it matters a lot to. And I hope that it can bring in new readers as well. If you've never read a Bond book, if you've only seen a few films, I hope that you can still pick it up and there'll be new characters you can feel attached to. I hope that it's thrilling. I hope that it's moving. I hope that it's funny. I hope that it's a bit gritty. I tried to, again, kind of taking my leave from Fleming. Fleming tackled what were the existential and very real threats of his day. Whether it was ideological differences or clashes, like with communism, or whether it was like the fear of the bomb. He was tackling what was on people's minds. And the fears that people were living with. And with making the first book, Double or Nothing, about the climate crisis, I was trying to do that as well, to kind of explore the world that we are living in and give people some heroes that they can identify with and maybe give them a bit of hope. So yeah, mainly I really hope people enjoy it.
I'm sure they will. If it's going by what I've read, I can guarantee that people will love it. One final question for you, Kim, before we do wrap this up. Obviously, you've spoken to the fact that this is going to be a trilogy of books and that you're really delving into these characters. But now that Anthony Horowitz has finished the mainline Bond stories, once you're finished with this trilogy, would you jump in and write a mainline Bond novel given the opportunity?
Oh, we'll have to wait and see what happens. I mean, I'll write James Bond and these characters for the rest of my life if they'll let me. So we'll have to wait and see. And that's one of the privileges, I think, of writing a trilogy, because I've never done that before. Testament and my next literary novel, A Wild and True Relation, are standalones. So I'm now writing book 2 of the trilogy, and the opportunity to return to characters whose psyches I felt so deeply embedded in the first book, and to kind of see, okay, well, what happens next? What was the effect of that? What was the effect of the ending on these characters? And what threat are they facing next? It's such a joy, and to be able to plan across the arc of 3 books is such a joy. So, if people want to keep reading them, I will just keep writing them.
Awesome. Good. I'm sure they definitely will. So final question, when is the book being released?
September 1st.
Fantastic.
It will be on shelves. Yeah. And I've just seen the cover today. I can't tell you about it because I'll be killed, but it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So I'm really excited to share it with people. By the time this airs, people will have seen it. I can't wait. I can't wait to hold it in my hands.
Am I getting paid royalties after I designed a cover back on Instagram?
I love people's covers so much. I was so amazed that people took the time. It's just amazing. And I was sending them to the Flemings and saying, "Are you seeing these? These are so cool."
There was such a cool response. Like, I mean, I love designing things, and I'm not a
Mm,
graphic designer by training by any stretch, but you hear these stories and these different things, it starts firing off ideas in your head. And I just had to get that down and start designing, because it definitely lends itself to
mm.
some incredible artwork. And I'm sure when it is released, it will join the pantheon of incredible Bond novel covers. I'm
Oh,
absolutely sure of it.
yeah, there's been some beauties, haven't there? I love the Fleming first editions, that he
Mm,
helped the Richard Chopping designs. Gosh, so beautiful. So there's a lot to live up to in more ways than one.
absolutely. Well, I'm sure people will thoroughly enjoy this book when it's released in September. Kim, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really, really appreciate the time that you've taken with me today. Where can people find you online to follow more of what you do?
People can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Kim T. Sherwood. And I have a Substack newsletter called Girl with the Golden Pen that folks can subscribe to as well, where I kind of give a kind of weekly window into my writing life.
Fantastic. Well, Kim, thank you again. Really, really appreciate your time. It's absolutely humbling to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for chatting with me.